To introduce myself, my name is Guillermo Olivos. I'm the Assistant Director of the Center for Social Value Creation, which is a center for excellence over at the Smith School of Business. Our center concentrates on social impact in business, social entrepreneurship, sustainability, basically the whole 9 yards when it comes to thinking about considerations in business planning beyond profit maximization. So I'm very happy to be here with MTech and happy to have accepted this invitation to come talk about considerations that potential entrepreneurs and current entrepreneurs should be taking into account when thinking through business plans as they relate to triple bottom line. How many of you guys know what triple bottom line means? One. Okay, cool. I'm going to teach you. This is great. All right, so just an overview of what we'll be going through. I'll do an introduction on entrepreneurship, how it relates to social value, and then this list could be exhaustive, but I've concentrated on 4 different facets of a business model that I think are particularly poignant when it comes to considering social value opportunities. So entrepreneurship to start, if you're here, you're either an entrepreneur or you're interested in entrepreneurship. You're probably putting together your business plans for submission for all of the competitions coming up. So whether you're talking, whether you're talking like Henry Ford, Sam Walton, Mark Zuckerberg, ultimately when you look up entrepreneur, it's pretty basic. Oxford English Dictionary says a person who sets up a business or businesses taking on financial risks in hope of profit. There's nothing about doing good for the world. There's nothing about keeping the planet greener. It's just the word profit. So for any of you guys that have taken economics classes, profit is revenue minus cost. To maximize profits, you would normally maximize revenues and minimize costs. And for any of you guys that have taken any intro classes or intermediate classes, you can draw your average total cost curve and your marginal cost curve, your marginal revenue, and the profit is the space between your revenues and your costs. So it seems simple, right? You just have that straightforward definition for what an entrepreneur is. You're looking at making profit. You follow this simple equation, you end up like Scrooge McDuck, and you get to swim all around your money bank, and it's all well and good. What I concentrate on in my center, and the purpose of this lecture, is thinking about considerations beyond simply bottom line profit maximization. Triple bottom line is normally associated with 3 Ps. In addition to profit, you also have considerations for people as well as planet. So if you take a look at this Venn diagram, it sort of shows how these 3 circles might interact and the potential synergies that one could achieve when doing additional environmental good or social good in addition to making money in your business. The term triple bottom line was coined in the 90s to try to get entrepreneurs and businesses and the whole gamut to start considering ramifications of business practice on society and environment. And if you look in the middle, that sweet spot right there where all 3 intersect is sustainability. So you create a business model that is not only making you money, but is also doing good for the environment and doing good for society. That's a pretty sustainable thing that's going to be, as long as you're practicing good business and good management and looking at your X's and Y's, going to be hard to beat or hard to argue with. So there is one thing I want to concentrate on with triple bottom line entrepreneurship. And that's the fact that it is grounded in strategy. It's grounded in business. I'm not here to say, make a business and just make a bunch of money and then 20 years down the line, donate all your money to charity and, the whole equation works. The purpose of thinking about these considerations as you start and through the entrepreneurial process is to build those considerations in as you go and make them part, of your brand, of your product, of your model from the get-go. So it's not just charity, and it's also not selectively paying more for things just because you think it's a good thing. We want the entire business model, the entire value chain, to not only incorporate social value, but also do it in a way that is profit maximizing. And that might sound crazy to a person that's never even thought about this before, but hopefully we're going to walk through some examples that go through how that might not be crazy. So at the beginning, I talked about 4 different areas I wanted to concentrate on. The first is human capital. So that's sort of an ugly word. Does anyone know a nicer way to say human capital? What does that mean? Anybody? Employees. Human capital. So your capital, your resources, humans are people. So your human capital, your employees that you're incorporating into your business that will eventually work for you, make your product, ship your goods, people that call you boss. So from on a very, very basic level, if I'm a business and I'm concentrating on short-term profit, the ideal thing for me to do is to hire as few people as possible for as cheap as possible and have them make as much stuff as possible. And in that way, I'm getting the most out of paying the least. So if you think about your cost of paying somebody to do work, and you have no soul or no heart, and you don't mind doing that and paying that minimum wage, then that would be the ideal way to maximize your profit when it comes to human resources. And wage, in theory, what you choose to pay an employee is a proxy for your skill. So you guys are all in college, or or are part of the community and have educated yourself and come to these workshops, and you've increased your knowledge base, which therefore increases your employability. You get more education, you get more skills, you get paid more. It's just sort of the way the world works. So I found a graph. It's not so straightforward, but basically it's comparing it's talking about college, high school wage premiums. And regardless of what's happening with women and men, I don't want to get into that. That's not the purpose of this lecture. You can see that both lines are above 0%. So there is a premium for going to college versus just having a high school degree. So entrepreneurial opportunities and hiring decisions. So you're an entrepreneur. You have a wide set of people that you can hire. People submit your resumes. Your goal, really, when you're maximizing profit, is to get the best value for a worker, right? And you want to get that sort of like diamond in the rough. You don't want to lose quality. You want to get the return on investment for human capital. And I'm really happy this lecture is happening now, so I can put this picture in here and talk about Jeremy Lin as like a perfect example of somebody that was a huge return on investment for the Knicks, in this last week and a half. And if you're a New York fan, hopefully will continue to be so. So return on investment for human capital. Where do the cost and revenue considerations come in? Does it really matter who I hire, how I think about my employees in my business model? How does that relate to triple bottom line thinking? Well, for certain populations, the US government does have like tax credits, which are, is money that you end up not having to pay when you come through your tax season for hiring individuals from certain populations. There's been a lot of sort of hubbub in the news lately about veterans coming back from war and trying to find jobs. And Obama has been sort of rolling out programs that give employers certain benefits for hiring from specific populations. So that's just one example. And now I want to show a short movie on an entrepreneurial enterprise. It's like 5 minutes. But I think it's pretty cool. So let's just take a look.
Industries is the largest gang intervention program in the US of A, I suppose, in the world. And so it's like a rehab center. It helps folks who gang members who want to redirect their lives. It's not a program for those who need help, it's only for those who want it. So we're here and ready when they're ready and willing.
I love my brother, same cat I got beef with. Hey yo, it's all heartfelt, although maybe sometimes I didn't like the way.
Now there are 5 businesses: Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Silkscreen, Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise, Homegirl Cafe, and Homeboy Maintenance. This place raises the question, what if we were to invest in these people rather than just endlessly seek to incarcerate our way out of this problem? So that's the idea.
That's right. Why don't you let me just spit my rhyme no more? I'm just telling you what you can't find.
That's what we have. Now we have about 400 plus that are working for Homeboy Industries, which is a good opportunity. That it's a want, not a need. And like I say, majority of us right here we're in want of a job. We're one of an opportunity that now we're able to show that given that opportunity, look at what we could do.
Many around town talking about
40 employees working in the bakery. Most of them are fresh out of jail or trying to get out of the gang and get their lives on track. We have men and women in the bakery. We have about 5 different accounts. We service USC, which is our biggest account and the one we love the most. We service 9 of the 11 cafes on campus, and it's going really, really well. Being out of jail.
I became a baker in college, and ever since then, I've been out for a year. If it wasn't for Carl Bay, I'll be still doing some selling, robbing, doing what I need to do.
See that? I talked to Father G, but he'll see right through you, know you're fake or not. You don't see what's going on. It's not.
Yeah, I'm kind of overwhelmed that I'm dealing with these bakers, learning how to train, and we got different sets here, but we work as a family, as a team, you know? That's the whole thing, as a team.
Like me, I applied for you to sing a set, so I'll be going to work
for years. She played all advances. I guess I ruined my chance.
A lot of neighborhoods are strict on my property. Being poor, being raised by a single mother, 5 kids, how well we're living in the housing project. It's pretty much self-explanatory. Poor, family, struggle. You don't really have no choice in life.
It's real hard. Like me, I'm a single mother. I don't have a baby father, and he died, so it was hard for me to step up. But you know, we have to do it. You know what I mean?
A miracle.
Homeboy introduced me to the family.
She seen that there was hope in us. You know, all I needed was a chance.
To reach out to the voices that can't be spoken for, you know? To reach out to a lot of people that lost something. But hope is something that, you know, you go after. It's like a dream, you know, you go after it. You know? If you don't want to be stricken by property, try your hardest to get after it. Excelling in academics.
Now, it's been the blessing that had my life all written down. Maybe I can die peacefully. But you listen, I live. Wherever you go, you carry peace in me. And everything I said, I meant it. But it was inspiration over some insane shit. I love my brother, same cat I got beef with. And yo, it's all heartfelt. Although maybe sometimes I did.
All right. So, come on. Let's click through. All right, so going back to that 3-circle diagram, I took out environmental because it wasn't as pertinent for this, but I just thought maybe having watched this video, and there's going to be a couple more social enterprises as examples of entrepreneurship that take TBL thinking into account as we go through this presentation, but I'd like to sort of just ask you guys to help me fill out this chart, then I'll show you what I came up with on my own. So to start, you start a business, you're hiring gang members, you're hiring people that just got out of prison. What do you think the economic advantages of that might be from an entrepreneur's perspective? Yeah.
Because it's likely that they have lower education, you can pay them less, but also like you get more bang for the buck in a sense.
Why do you think you get more bang for the buck?
Because they're not used to having a job like this where they're getting paid to do these types of things. You know, they're used to selling drugs or doing whatever they do.
Right.
And it's just the fact that you're paying them to do good things and to keep them off the streets is the bang for the buck.
So you're saying like you might get more employee loyalty out of hiring somebody like that, so less risk for turnover. And when you lose an employee, you have to train a new one, so you might be lowering your risk for paying for increased trainings in the future. Okay, cool. Yeah?
I would say there's a bigger risk of turnaround in them because they're not used to regular minimum wage jobs.
Mm-hmm.
They're used to making fast cash.
Mm-hmm.
So economic advantage is you get cheap labor. Disadvantage is that you're going to have a lot of turnaround because once they get their paycheck on Friday,
and they see that they work their 40, 50 hours and made what they would make in a day during their former activities, they probably won't show up the next week.
That's true. You'd have to, I mean, that certainly is a potential disadvantage as well. And you just sort of have to weigh whether you believe more in giving that second chance, or you believe more that someone's going to get a 2-week check and then, walk out the door and you're going to have to look for somebody new. Yeah?
I'd say another disadvantage is some clients won't come in because they'll think the product can't be good if it's made by, crooks. Or
Right. So you risk brand dilution, so to speak. People hear that you have all these criminals working for you and people don't want to come in. Yeah.
I think it could be an advantage too if you're in the right neighborhood. People have family members who are affected by gang violence or whatever. There are communities that are affected and that would it's not necessarily a taboo, but it's something that they want to support.
Right.
Because it would help their neighborhood.
Right. So yeah, like sort of investing in your community. Okay. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, advantages I see is the employees could be very street savvy. They know what's going on in the neighborhood, how the products could be maybe positioned to their community. So I can see a big advantage.
Okay, so more sort of community value out of this. Okay. Let's go through some of the stuff I thought of. So I put in a thing about these people coming out of jail and sort of the vocational training that a lot of them go through when they're in jail. And if you noticed, it wasn't like they had like homeboy financial modeling or homeboy consultant. It was, homeboy bakery, homeboy maintenance. And those sorts of things there are classes for in jail. So in theory, homeboy industries could match up with the prison system, see what sort of skill sets are being built in the prison system, and then take advantage of those to do a quicker turnover into having employees roll on. Something that nobody said, and actually a lot of people don't even know this, is there are a lot of federal subsidies when it comes to hiring ex-convicts at the federal level and the state level. Maryland has a number, I think it's like $4,000 kickback per convict hired or something like that, in the state of Maryland at least. And on top of that, state to state, there are some programs that even will give employers fidelity bonds for sort of taking that risk and hiring out of this population. But you guys touched on a lot of the disadvantages as well. So exactly like you said, is your employee going to get his check after 2 weeks and walk out the door? Like, why would I want to take that risk when I can hire someone that I know just statistically might not do that? Poorly managed publicity could hurt brands. You're taking a risk by hiring a certain population. You need to make sure that as an entrepreneur and as a business owner, you're messaging why you're doing that and what the value of that is in a positive way to your community, and not just letting people make assumptions, because people will just come up with the same ideas that we're talking about in-house. And then job mobility limitations, of course. If you run a daycare, there's probably a high number of convicts that you just aren't allowed to legally hire. You can't hire a financial launderer to be your bank teller, et cetera. On the social side, you're providing jobs, you're increasing the tax base, and you're hiring grateful workers, the loyalty thing, people that are really proud to be there and proud that somebody sort of reached out and gave them a second chance. So on one hand, I know that there's a risk of somebody walking out after 2 weeks. On the other hand, you might find that those expectations are the opposite. And I think that's what Homeboy Industries finds. They talked about family and hope and sort of being grateful for that second chance. Disadvantages, if I already work at somewhere and then all of a sudden my boss starts hiring convicts, is that going to mess up our internal company culture? And am I going to feel comfortable going in there? So again, with this convict situation, I think it's really important as a manager to think about, how you communicate changes or decisions that you make to your employees, to your customers, to all of the stakeholders that have something to do with your business. So we talked about Homeboy Industries, whether it's that or, farmers that are paid equitably through fair trade, whether it's taking advantage of tax credits, hiring workers with disabilities, or veterans, like I said before. There are a lot of opportunities, and particularly starting businesses in the United States, I would make sure that you're keyed into what sort of tax credits end of year you can take advantage of just because you hire a person that fits into a specific demographic. And this would also apply to low-income individuals on food stamps as well. There are programs for that as well. So the second thing I want to talk about is supply chain, which is a 3-syllable phrase that encompasses a lot of different things. So people talk about sustainable supply chain, green supply chain, pretty often. It's pretty common in the economic vernacular these days. And people, think about whether it's your raw materials, your supplier, who's making things out of those supplies, how you're distributing, who's warehousing it, your consumers. There are a bunch of different people touching parts of the product along the line. So with that, as a manager sort of existing maybe on like this level, you have some control over where these things are coming from, what you're using to make your product, but you don't have all the control. So when you're doing making considerations on the side of supply chain, when it comes to triple bottom line, you really, really, really have to make sure that you know exactly where you're getting your supplies from. Because that might happen, that might happen, that might happen, that might happen. These are 4 very, very reputable brands that have survived through the years, very successful brands, yet there are certain issues in their supply chain when it comes to monitoring, when it comes to the brand that they're selling versus what they're actually keeping track of on the back end, that in the end come through and really hurt their image. And it remains to be seen what will happen with Apple and Foxconn. I know that's still an ongoing thing. But the Nike sweatshops thing in the early 90s, I don't know if you guys remember in 2003, 2004, when it came out that all those Mattel toys had like 100 times the amount of lead that they were supposed to, and all the Dora the Explorers had to go in the trash. There was a big thing that came out 5 years ago about Nestle using palm oil in its Kit Kat bars, and massive deforestation that was happening in the Amazon, and orangutans dying. So you have these like orangutans wearing these like killer Kit Kat bars. Give rainforest a break. So there's decisions at all nodes. So think about those like 6, that chain of like 6 different sort of stakeholders when it comes to ultimately delivering a product to a consumer. So on the supplier side, you think about environmental impact. You think about whether your regulation is brand moral. You think about animal welfare if you're in the business of delivering food. McDonald's just announced 2 days ago that they're going to stop doing the closely caged pigs for their pork products, which a lot of the Midwest farm states that don't have rules about not having closely caged pigs are a little upset about. So we'll have to see how that shakes out. But that's McDonald's making a decision that they don't want to sort of subscribe to that. Manufacturing, you think about chemicals, fair labor, carbon footprint, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different things here, and our second social enterprise that we're going to talk through comes from an industry that gets pretty scrutinized pretty regularly.
At the core of the relationship model is really connecting the people in the supply chain. And when I was working in Mexico, as I was starting out my coffee career, I saw firsthand how many farmers were not connected to the places where they sold the coffee. They had very little idea about what happened to their coffee, how it was processed, how to taste it, what the prices were. There was just a lack of transparency. And I set out to try to change that supply chain system to provide more transparency. In the process, I realized that those farmers could get trained in tasting and could get trained in producing better exports and all kinds of other areas. So it became clear I needed to put people on the ground who had local knowledge, who could work with those farmers throughout the year. And that's why we started the origin offices. When we started having operations at source, that was a departure from how the industry usually looked at overseas operations. Most of the time, importers and exporting companies would put up their own mills and mill coffee of small growers. In our case, we wanted to work with established co-ops of growers who would export their coffee, but they needed a lot of support in understanding what were the demands of their customers, how could they best export their coffee, how could they learn to taste their coffee. So it was this idea that we would reinvest back into the education and training of growers that was a departure from where things were before. We recognized early on the power of having farmers train other farmers in best practices, whether it was organic productivity or taste or how to operate mills. And over the years, we found that's one of the best tools is simply taking outstanding experts from one coffee region and bringing them to another coffee region and having them share their knowledge. With the success of the Mexico office in 2002, we did a couple of things that were noteworthy. We put people down there, roasters had immediate access, and what happened is our business started to grow. And 4 years later, we needed more coffee, and Mexico was going to be stretched if they had to also do South America. After a number of trips, we realized we had to set up a new shop. There were a couple of great people that wanted to join us, and we decided that Peru, as one of the largest suppliers of organic and fair trade coffee in the world, would be the right place to do it. Starting the origin offices and realizing that tasting the coffee is really one of the key components of successful commerce for the growers, we also brought the ability of taste and expert tasting into our company and did it at a level that's really unprecedented in the industry. And that's helped us go to our roasters and really be able to pick exactly what the tastes are that they're looking for and translate those to the growers. And we also get the growers certified as expert tasters so that then we have one unified chain of people tasting coffee so they can deliver exactly the right coffees to the right customers. Africa represents an incredible opportunity for all coffee roasters and drinkers because of the myriad of choices and flavors that come out of Africa. Ethiopia is the cradle of coffee. There are tens of thousands of varieties there. So having an office in Africa made a lot of sense because Africa is also beset by some of the most difficult supply chain problems that you'll find anywhere in the world. Usually the places where we can make the most impact are the areas where transparency has not been strong, where traceability is difficult, where there are many, many layers of middlemen in between the growers and the roasters. And by putting an origin office in place, we started one in Tanzania, we're able to change that dynamic and provide a whole new way of operation for growers there. And we see immediate results, and it expands the amount of money that goes into those communities. When I think about the origin offices as a catalyst for the community, I get very excited because the idea that you can have a place that serves as a way for the village growers to connect to other networks of nutrition, of education, of finance, of health. Those are all kinds of issues that are important to the growers and ultimately important to us as coffee buyers because the quality of life has a huge impact on the quality of the product.
All right. So, Sustainable Harvest wants to make coffee. They see that there are these very big problems with the number of stops between somebody that grows coffee and somebody that's drinking coffee here in the United States. If I grow coffee in Africa or South America before this model existed, I bring my coffee beans to one guy who then takes a cut, puts a margin on it. He brings it to a port, gives it to someone else that takes a cut, puts a margin on it. All these different people that exist sometimes in places where market forces don't force them to price reasonably are putting extra margins on coffee. And it becomes a question of whether the person originally growing the coffee is actually, making an equitable share. So as you saw, Sustainable Harvest invested in putting field offices in locations where they were sourcing a lot of their coffee beans to increase the abilities of the farmers to have more control over receiving a fair value for their coffee. So, that's what I saw. Maybe you guys saw something different. But you can go. There's a red, blue, green box. I'd love to hear anything about advantages or disadvantages of somebody trying to sell coffee to you as a guy walking down the street and caring so much about what's going on halfway around the world. Does that make sense? Does that not make sense? Any thoughts? Anyone else? All right, what's up?
I would say it definitely makes sense to understand the supply chain, which is something that they didn't really know before
Yeah.
this existed. And to, you know, people are going to be paying more for the USDA organic, things like that.
Yeah.
So they're definitely good investments and should get a return for that.
Okay. So you can put that premium on fair trade and you sort of trust that the market will make that work. Okay, yeah.
You certainly look at your typical $5 cup of coffee, premium cup of coffee, that you purchase at the retail level. But if you contracted directly, there's a lot of steps in between. You contracted directly with the farmers of that coffee or the equivalent of that coffee. It's about a 5 cent a cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big financial difference there. You could realize, or they could realize, or you could share in that sort of differences in financial disparity that's available. I mean, there's an economic advantage there that's possible.
Right, you reduce the number of percent hikes along the way. You increase the value that everyone that remains gets out of that value chain. Any other thoughts? Okay, we'll just go through some of this stuff. So exactly what I was just saying. You reduce the middleman margin hikes, so that's a huge economic advantage, not only for the supplier, but for you as the entrepreneur selling coffee. Disadvantage, if you're putting people on the ground, you're going to have to invest more capital into maintaining those on-ground operations, so it's an additional cost consideration. Fair wages, if you're considering, you know, paying that equitable price at the very beginning to the farmer, it may mean a more expensive end product. You have two conflicting forces going there, so you'd have to dive into the equation a little bit more. Like you said, that $5 cup of coffee, if you're selling for fair trade, you might be able to hit that luxury consumer. It just depends on who you're marketing to, right? If they can bear the extra costs that would be associated with that. Social, equitable wages. One of the last things that the entrepreneur said was the quality of life has a huge impact on the quality of your product. That might sound cheesy, but you know, I think you'll find in a lot of different industries, a lot of different sectors, happy employees create products that are high quality. There's lots of HRM studies that have been done in that field, but that seems particularly true in this situation. Disadvantages, social. Maybe not all the middlemen are bad guys. When you streamline this, you are inevitably eliminating jobs. You know, so it's good for the person at the beginning and the person at the end. But you know, that's sort of, I mean, from a social perspective, maybe you are eliminating jobs, but you're eliminating jobs in the name of efficiency. So that's also sort of a toss-up. Environmental. I'd say closer relationships with your growers means less risk that some sort of shady pesticide or something that is going to contaminate the coffee is going on in the growing process. No middlemen, I would also argue, may mean more direct transport, less carbon emissions if it doesn't have to go from this guy to this guy all around the country before it leaves. I couldn't think of any environmental disadvantages. If any of you guys could think of any, please shout them out. So, before we leave supply chain, how many of you guys have ever heard the term greenwashing? Is your hand raised? What's greenwashing?
Is it referencing a marketing term that when you have green products, I'm not completely sure on all. I just heard the term.
Okay. So greenwashing is basically a noun. It is a noun. It is a superficial or insincere display of concern for the environment that is shown by an organization. So the term greenwashing was born out of the mid-1980s when a bunch of hotels came up with the brilliant idea of putting out little cards on beds that said, you know, put your towel in the hamper and we'll wash it and we'll bring you a new one. But if you don't, we'll leave it because Hilton is really environmentally friendly, or like Marriott or whatever. So, you know, it made them seem like they were more environmentally friendly, but when you dug into the nitty-gritty of whether they were actually doing anything strategically with this decision, they weren't. It had no effect on their costs. They were just doing it so that they could get buzz going around that their particular hotel chain was conscious of the environment.
Wasn't that less work for them anyway?
And also it was less work for them anyways in the end. So, you know, the point being they weren't so concerned with the environmental impact as much as just sort of the straight nuts and bolts. So, you know, and you see that all the time. Like you pick up products and it's like, this is so green, or, you know, like there's like a tree on this, and you just assume that that means it's something good. And this cartoon sort of pokes fun at that. So I would say in terms of staying accountable to things that you market. Oh, did you want to?
Yeah, so, but if they do have an environmental impact,
right.
Does their intent matter?
If they do have positive or negative?
Positive environmental impact.
Does their intent?
So even though they're doing it because maybe it saves them money and time, does their original intent matter?
That's sort of a philosophical question, I guess. I would say.
I mean, that's really what it is, a discussion question.
Yeah. That's more of a I don't know. What do you guys think?
If you as a consumer just picked two equally cost to you products,
right?
One that is green, meaning it has less environmental impact, and one that isn't green, that has a lot of environmental impact, but the cost to you in financial terms is the same, isn't that a big choice for the consumer? Meaning, if you choose to buy green, even though it doesn't save you any particular financial advantage, that is an advantage. That is something that you can certainly hold in your
right. It's a utility equation. So
it's a value that you should have, I should say.
Right.
It is a value that does have value.
I would say, yeah. I mean, I think often when it comes to sort of green products, and I wrote a little blog about this 6 months ago, but I think the onus on a lot of companies that market those sort of green products that cost a little more is to continue innovating and get the prices down on those, because there are a large number of individuals that, all things considered, would love to buy a green product instead of, you know, a non-green product. What I'm trying to get to on this slide, though, is less about sort of the decision to buy green and not buy green, and more on sort of making sure that you stay accountable to how you're marketing yourself. So when you say, like, you know, we're a fair trade company, you know, pay our workers equitable wages, don't check on that in year one and then just assume everything is same state and going well in year 3, because something like this will happen. This is, you know, a chart of Mattel's stock right around the lead situation. So just make sure when you communicate something to a consumer that you monitor that promise and you manage that relationship accordingly, so that you don't seem like a liar or like, you know, somebody that was trying to mislead consumers, even if you weren't. I mean, I feel like a lot of these PR supply chain hiccups weren't because somebody was like, ah ha ha, like I'm not gonna like check on these factories and make sure that the chemicals aren't going into it. It just sort of slipped like in the process of running a large multinational corporation. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a big problem for me when I buy organic.
Uh-huh.
I don't know that I trust that it's really organic, and there's no way to tell that it is. It's just that little note that says organic.
Yeah.
But if it's like from Chile or Peru or even the United States, how do I know that somebody's there really monitoring?
It's true, and that's a whole other discussion, like the certifications questions. What does this seal mean versus what does this particular seal mean? Are you guys familiar with Honesty?
Yeah.
Okay, so so the two co-founders of Honesty, one of them was a graduate school professor of mine, and he gave a lecture on, you know, just sort of the process of bringing Honesty to market with Seth Goldman and how that all sort of played out and this and that. And he handed out Honesty, and I was looking at these Honesty bottles, and it's got like USDA, and it's got like all these different seals. And one of the seals just says, it's just a picture of a tree, and it says plant a tree underneath. So I raised my hand, and I'm like, hey Barry, what is this? Is Honesty part of like the National Arbor Association or something? And he was like, oh, no. Actually, we were just making seals, and we were originally like mocking up the design for the product, and we thought it would just like look good if we just drew one with a tree on it that said plant a tree. and then, believe me, all of my peers that were dual degrees in the forestry school were like, you know, just up in arms about this, and like, you know, that is greenwashing, that's ridiculous. And from his perspective, he was like, well, I know that we're doing other good things, so what does it matter if I make something up? So again, you know, it's sort of like a philosophical question of like, you know, what's important to you when you're communicating something? You know, do you feel okay about saying, you know, we're this level of green or this level of, you know, carbon reduction? if somebody pushes you on it, if a reporter calls you and asks you to explain that, you know. So as the business gets bigger, and I imagine all of you guys will start very successful businesses that will get very huge, as it gets bigger, you get more scrutiny. That's just sort of the name of the game. It's like when people get more famous, they get more scrutiny. So when you say things about your business, like just make sure that they're true. Make sure that you continue to ensure that they're true for your own sort of accountability as a manager. Anything else about greenwashing? Okay. So the third thing I wanted to talk about was consumer targets, or your customers. So we've talked about human capital, who works for you. We've talked about supply chain, how that stuff gets to you. And now we're going to talk about who we're actually giving things to. And our case study for this, and this section is going to just focus on this particular Nobel Peace Prize winning social enterprise, is the Grameen Bank. And the Grameen Bank was the first sort of microfinance institution. How many people know what microfinance is? You in the back, what's microfinance? You guys can like trade words and.
Microfinance is a technique or practice of microloans. You choose small lenders. Forget the name. The Bremen Bank is the example of that. So you choose small lenders that are regularly not eligible for financing through larger banks or more established institutions, and finance their small ideas. And a lot of third world countries or developing countries have had great success.
That's right. So just like you said, extending small loans to very, very poor individuals for self-employment projects to generate income, basically extend credit to populations, to customers from a bank's perspective that would never have the possibility of building credit. And bank systems are you know, sort of built on, you know, let's just walk through this. So traditional banks, they reach many individuals to determine your loan risk, which then determines how much interest I charge you to lend you some money. I call TransUnion or I call Equifax and I say, hey, you know, what did Joe's loan payment history look like for that car he bought or for that student loan he took out or whatnot? You know, I get your credit rating. And beyond those credit ratings, if I'm someone like B of A, if I'm someone like, you know, any M&T, you know, any other high value, high touch bank, I'm not really going to deviate much from credit scores unless it's like a very special situation with like a high wealth client or it's a different sort of financing project when trying to consider for the average consumer whether I'm going to give them their loan, because that's not really in my best interest. Like I have this system of scores, it's what the country uses, I'm just going to look at your score, I'm going to figure out how much money I think you should pay me for borrowing X amount of money. So, given that, if we were to draw a line here, what do you guys think it would look like? Like that? Yeah. Yeah. You're right. I drew it curvy because I found the curves in the Microsoft and I liked it. So whether it's a straight line or a curve, regardless, it's, you know, it's shaped like that. So I have a perfect credit score. I don't have to pay that much monthly payment. I have a terrible credit score. I have to pay a huge monthly payment. So let's just sort of like think about someone that has a credit score around like 520 or something. So if I have a credit score of 520 and I also don't make that much money, I am never going to exist in this triangle up here. I don't want to get too economicsy on you guys, but like I just can't afford, as somebody that makes $30,000 a year, to pay X amount of monthly payment. So I'm sort of stuck in this hole, right? But let's say I had a low credit score, or you know, I had no credit at all, but like I'm a really, really, really good payer backer to my friends. Like I'm like really, you know, I'm just like a very trustworthy person. I know that this number says this, but like, you know, your equation's all messed up, like, or this equation doesn't apply to my specific situation. I would still be able to pay that. But banks aren't going to give me that loan anyways, if we're just talking about traditional banks, because that doesn't make sense according to their equation. So what you think about is this opportunity for additional income that a microfinance institution might garner for these particular individuals that an equation says you shouldn't give credit to, but in fact, with some considerations and some changes and adjustments, would actually be profit making from a bank's perspective. So in microfinance networks, they have partnerships. So Grameen Bank has partnerships with localized microfinance institutions, like little banks, like on the ground in these villages across Bangladesh. That started in Bangladesh, and now it's across the world. They rely on individualized assessments with local considerations. So it's not like just an equation. It's people that know people. It's being accountable to the individuals in your community when you borrow money. It's a different sort of way of thinking about lending than you have in the United States. And the craziest thing is the default rate for these loans to these really, really, really low wealth individuals is like 3% or something. Like 96.6, I have the number coming up, but 96.6% I think of these loans get paid back. That's higher, that's a better default, worse. It's a more ideal default rate than what you see in higher education loans and credit cards in America. So, there's something to be thought of in that. And then, so our third movie will be, it's just good to know about Grameen Bank. So this is just a little talk about one person's situation or one country's situation.
The 2004 tsunami was one of the deadliest natural disasters on record. Aceh province in Indonesia was the hardest hit. More than 200,000 people died or were reported missing, and 500,000 were left homeless. In the year following the disaster, unemployment in Aceh increased nearly 400%, and more than half the population was living in poverty.
Adik itu nggak tahu kemana. Sampai sekarang mama dua-dua, mama rumah tua, mama saya nggak ada. Kakak sampai sekarang nggak tahu di mana kuburan orang tuh.
In response to the disaster, the Indonesian government, together with international aid organizations, quickly mobilized, providing emergency food, shelter, and medical care to the survivors.
Kami duit nggak ada, sedih kali waktu hari itu. Kami ingin kali biar ada modal usaha, biar anak kami bisa sekolah.
Based on its 12 years of experience in microfinance, Grameen Foundation recognized that long-term recovery depended on restoring the livelihoods of the survivors. By providing loans, microfinance institutions can help poor women to start or expand tiny businesses. Grameen Foundation provides funding for microloans and technical support to these institutions, allowing them to reach more poor people more effectively.
We as an organization felt really compelled to take part in the recovery effort. We've seen how microfinance could play a really valuable role in the long-term recovery effort following disasters, and that it plays an important part after the relief phase is over and after assets have been replaced and grants have been given. That credit given to women can really help them rebuild their lives.
In 2005, Grameen Foundation began collaborating with Mitra Duafa, a local microfinance institution committed to empowering poor communities through microfinance. Soon, Mitra Duafa opened its first branch in Darussalam, one of the worst affected towns in Banda Aceh. One of Mitra Duafa's first clients from Darussalam was Rahmati. Mitra Duafa reached out to those hardest hit by the catastrophe. They visited temporary shelters, offering loans to those who had nothing.
Kami bilang, mana ada orang tuh percaya sama kita nggak ada duit sama kita udah habis kita makan, kita jual apa mau diambil, beras sama minyak yang ada di rumah, apa diambil nanti.
She and her family lost everything during tsunami, and were still coping with the loss of her youngest son. Determined to start over and provide for her family, Rahmati took out her first loan to start a business.
Pinjaman pertama saya ambil untuk bikin modal usaha, untuk bikin kue basah, beli tempat-tempat, beli itu semua, beli gula, beli tepung, beli telur. bikin kue, antar ke kedai-kedai. Jadi bisa kami tutup untuk mitra duafa, bisa untuk jajan untuk anak sekolah, bisa kami tinggal untuk beli barang kami. Mudah-mudahan bisa simpan lah sedikit-sedikit.
These loans are based on social collateral. The 30 women in Rahmati's group support one another and hold each other accountable. These women share the same tragedy and have faced the same challenges together. Their weekly center meetings, first held in the temporary housing camp where they were all living, created lasting friendships and a support system that sustained them through the most trying times. Now, in her 4th loan cycle, Rahmati has expanded her business. In addition to making and selling pisang sale, a traditional snack of deep-fried bananas, she now buys bottled water wholesale to sell to her neighbors and local shops.
Sampai dari pertama ibu satu tipi nggak ada, sampai ibu udah kayak gini, sampai besar beli tanah lagi.
In 2007, the American Red Cross partnered with Grameen Foundation and Mitra Duafa to expand microcredit throughout Aceh. This support allowed Mitra Duafa to open 6 more branches that will provide tools to more than 18,000 poor women to restart their lives and regain their livelihoods. Dori is a borrower from one of the newly opened branches. The tsunami leveled the small fishing village where she lived. All of her family members survived, but their home and business did not. Last year, Mitra Duafa loaned her money to build up her small business selling kerupuk, a traditional chip. What started as a small family business now employs members of her community, transforming their lives and hers.
Awak kau betul betul dengan sebelum digaji kau 8 mas. Nah awak pasal rupuk tidak aja gaji menurut jam dia.
In the 4 years since Grameen Foundation first partnered with Mitra Duafa, their microfinance services have benefited over 13,000 families in Aceh.
Harapan kami dengan progres yang begitu bagus di Aceh sampai dengan saat ini, maka Mitra Duafa bisa berkembang dengan baik dan banyak lagi melayani masyarakat miskin di Aceh.
Grameen Foundation and Mitra Duafa have seen the profound impact of microfinance following a disaster and are committed to providing a better life for the poor tsunami survivors of Aceh.
Thanks. All right. So before we jump into the workshop portion, so this is Muhammad Yunus. How many people have ever heard of this guy? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Oh, we're doing good on numbers. So he won the Nobel Peace Prize. He's a pretty big deal. He was born in 1940. Didn't start as a social entrepreneur. Didn't always want to, extend loans for $10 to really, really poor people. He was an economist. He was an academic, and he was a for-profit entrepreneur. He had his own packaging company that did very well. And he did that for a little bit. And then one day, when he was about like 25, 26 years old, he took a break from his teaching at his university and walked through a village nearby and realized sort of the extent to which the lack of loan options for really poor individuals, for low income individuals, was inhibiting their ability to achieve any sort of class mobility, any sort of life improvement, any sort of momentum when it comes to improvements. And the problem was twofold. A, banks wouldn't lend to people without collateral. Like if you didn't have anything you could put up, then you didn't get any money. There were loan sharks. They charged you 10% interest a week, which means if it's compounded, you borrow $1, you owe $128 in a year if you don't make any payments back. So It's not really that feasible, you know, but it was the only option that existed. So he said, you know, well, maybe if I can get some increased regulation through building, you know, local partnerships with people that actually know these individuals, if I have a mechanism by which I can figure out who's more likely to pay me back versus who isn't, then I can extend microloans. And it doesn't mean I'm like risking or putting up, you know, billions of dollars. It's just, you know, little loans, and, you know, we'll just start small and see how this program goes. When he did that initial walkthrough, he lent, I think it was like 26 American dollars to 40 different women. That was like the first loan. It was just money in his pocket, and got all of that paid back. There was no interest, of course, but, you know, then he realized, well, maybe I can build this into a sustainable business model. Today, I can't remember if I have this in the slide deck later or not, but today, so Grameen extends 4 different types of loans with 4 set interest rates. It's very simple. It's 20% interest a year, simple interest, not compounded. So that means if you borrow $1, no matter what rate, you know, you pay it back or whatnot, you owe 20 cents in a year. 20% on income generating loans. I want to say 7% on home loans, 5% on student loans, and they have a special 0% category for poor individuals, where it's just literally like money to get them from 0 to 0.1 and start going. And so this guy won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. Right. So you want to start a bank. You've got like a lot of money, and you're, you know, all FDIC insured and all that stuff. You got all these sort of directions you want to go. Why would I want to go lend $10 a piece to a bunch of individuals halfway around the world when, you know, I could just become a regular bank? Like what are the economic, social, environmental advantages and disadvantages of going this direction, relatively? Anybody?
They can expand much more. They can be a global company.
Right.
In which way they get to reach more people, though. So it's more of the law of the small numbers. So you get to meet a large number of people with small amounts. That could be economic advantage.
Right. So that's the sort of bottom of the pyramid theory. Like there are so many individual people there that it's a different way of looking at a business model as opposed to marketing to like a high wealth luxury borrower. But there are different economic repercussions, positive, from that. Okay. Yeah.
These people learn more likely to pay back.
Why do you think that?
I mean, that is what the statistics says.
Oh, I shouldn't have told you that. Yes, okay, so given the statistics, we know that those people are more likely to pay back than all of the college kids running up credit card bills. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
You're creating more by helping people build their own wealth, then you're stimulating their economy and bringing more businesses. It's making everybody better off as a whole when you listen to them.
So there's sort of societal benefits in addition to the benefits to the individuals. Okay. Anyone else? I'll come back to you. Yeah.
It's sustainable long term, like where they were saying like people coming in with grants and stuff after like a disaster or something like that, the money just kind of goes.
Yeah.
Whereas this, it forces them to build a model where they can afford to pay it back, and so they already have that in place, so then it continues on to the future and builds on itself, just like the lady who expanded her business.
Right.
They do the same thing for more people, so it's a more long-term.
Right.
effect.
So, like, you know, an American or European watchdog grant foundation doesn't have to worry that when they leave, everything is going to stop. Like, they're building in a business that replicates itself, sort of a model that is organic in a sense. What were you going to say?
The people who borrow out of microfinance wouldn't cause that much damage to the environment than the people who would actually borrow out of a normal bank in terms of buying transportation, or they're going to put their money to use to build their lives rather than buy things, artificial things that might affect the environment indirectly.
Right.
It's more of an indirect way of looking at it, but
It's not like anyone that's taking out a microloan is taking out a consumer microloan to like buy a boat or anything like that. Is that what you're saying?
So what I'm trying to say is, if they're going to take a loan, they're taking it to build their lives. it's not a loan to improve their lives, or it's not. I mean, it's not the loan that's going to take their life to the next level where they get to buy more things that benefit them on.
Okay.
Just looking at it from the back door.
So implicitly, because Grameen limits itself to these 4 specific products, those 4 products are all very, very low on the Maslow pyramid of needs. So like just by nature, it's going to be much less likely that they're going to not try to not default on them, I guess. Okay. I can get behind that. All right, let's see what I came up with. So I talked about those 4 financial products and the associated interest rates with all of them. And I mentioned that recovery rate. So it's profitable. Disadvantages, I'd say, you know, if you're just thinking about your cash flows, you're doing your projections, the deal flow is necessarily small to start. It's not like you can it's just the logistical nightmare of lending, you know, to 2 million people right away. Like that would never happen. So you're going to have to build out some sort of scalability. You know, you're not going to get like a high wealth borrower that's going to give your bank a return in the same way just because there are too many moving parts. So that's maybe, you know, maybe one disadvantage. On top of that, the number of people that you're managing means you have to hire more managers, you have to sort of invest more capital in building those relationships that make the model work in the first place. Social, we touched on some of this stuff, economic advancement at both the individual and societal level. Opportunity equity, which is huge and not always available without, you know, programs like this. Just bless you. And then just spreading financial literacy in general. I couldn't think of any disadvantages on the social side. Again, if you guys can think of any, let me know. And then there's no way anybody really would have known this, but I knew it because I Googled it. But over time in its history, Grameen has sort of been able to reinvest some of its profits into initiatives in environmental health and water sanitation, which then, you know, have a positive effect on the environment and on the planet. So that is also a good thing. And then I couldn't think of any environmental disadvantages. Cool. So, you know, from a marketing perspective, you're like, okay, this is like some guy that won the Nobel Peace Prize. How does this, excuse me, apply to me? You know, I have my business idea. I'm putting together my business plan. Like, I'm not trying to, you know, immediately change the world or whatnot. But I would argue that, you know, any good entrepreneur, when you're thinking about making a product and who you're going to sell that product to, you got to think about untapped customer segments. You know, Muhammad Yunus realized that at the base of the pyramid, there were millions and millions of people that he could make a margin of profit off of and also do good for society. Both of those things came hand in hand. So, you know, always brainstorm your untapped customer segments, and when you can reach them and provide some sort of additional benefit in those other parts of the triple bottom line, all the better. Risks, I would say sometimes people get really excited about a specific idea, say, I'm going to create this thing, it's going to be great, it's going to help people, and, you know, it's just like, I'm going to make money and I'm going to do good. And they get so sort of focused on the environment and the social facets that they forget about their basic business. So just sort of like a moment to take a big deep breath and remember that in the end you're an entrepreneur. The other parts of the triple bottom line should feed into business thinking and business strategy. Similar, I mean, you know, and this is just sort of competitive strategy considerations. You know, make sure you're always aware of who you're competing against, because ultimately in the end, if you go bankrupt before you serve your target customers, you don't hit any bottom lines, any of the three. So, all right, home stretch, financing. So I'm an entrepreneur, I have this awesome idea, I have this business plan, I'm going to start pitching to investors, I'm going to get some money. Where's your startup capital going to come from? So depending on, you know, the structure of your organization, if you're a nonprofit or a B Corp or a for-profit, different opportunities become available to you. But I sort of like thinking about it in three sort of buckets. You got your government money, then you got like your foundation grant money, and government and foundation is sort of grant money, and then you have your private sector money. So I want to sort of focus on the differences between private sector social enterprise funding and government and foundation. So government, I don't know if anybody gets, I mean, Jay probably knows what I'm talking about, but government money is cyclical, you know. You apply for money, it comes through, you know, once a year or once every 2 years, and there are a certain number of benchmarks that you have to hit in that time period. There's massive reporting involved, and if you don't use it all, you have to give it back. Like, it's just very, very restrictive, I would say. Now, that's advantageous for very, very regimented programs. Like, that works for some programs, and it works for some models. But it's just something that you need to keep in mind when you're thinking about government funding. Foundation, I'd say similar. Just instead of the government, it's some board of directors at, you know, the Carnegie Foundation or whoever that say you need to do this and this and this by this certain date, or we're going to pull back. With government and foundation, when you take all the administrative costs into consideration versus the dollars going out the door, the transaction costs are like ridiculous. It's literally like 20 to 45%. Like Bill Drayton said this in an Economist article 3 years ago. It's like 20 to 45% transaction cost. Whereas, you know, when you do your transaction costs for a finance deal in the private sector, it's like 2 to 4.5%. You know, if you're running books, maybe you get 4.5 or whatever. So it's pretty ridiculous. Private sector. Whereas, you know, restrictions focus on finite tactical milestones. You know, got to do this and this and this and this by this date, or else we're pulling it all out. Private funding, you know, an angel investor can sort of make the rules for you. You can say, okay, you know, I see that you have a long-term strategic plan. I see that you're not going to like have X, Y, and Z done in the next 18 months. But it's cool, you know, just like get this part done and we can continue talking about it. It's more of a dialogue and less restrictive, I think, just by nature than you would find with government and foundation funding. Now, the big problem is obviously finding it. You know, where are these angels that also care about your social enterprise? So,
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Just a general question on the foundation type grant. So, when someone obtains one of those, does he have the budget to only actually plan to use like 60% of it, knowing that those transaction costs are so high?
So those are transaction costs on sort of like a macro level, considering like all the sort of what people get paid to review grants and like give them out, and you know, just sort of the embedded costs of administrating a grant from a foundation versus a private sector.
Just a follow-up question. The government grants would not restrict your salary per se.
Would not restrict your salary.
As the CEO of the company getting the grant, would not restrict, you know, how much you put a salary for yourself.
That's sort of a different question. So there are restrictions on salary for 501c3 organizations, nonprofit organizations. Generally, if your administrative costs start to creep higher than 10% of your total budget, then you start getting questions from the government on whether you're actually a nonprofit. Okay, so investment considerations from the source side. So I made this cool graph with these 4 squares, and I just sort of want to take you guys along with me for a second. So I've got on the x-axis an investment that's low risk for profit, like it's probably going to make a profit. It's like awesome. And then an investment that's sort of high risk for profit. You know, I think it's good. It might make a profit. If it does, maybe it'll make a lot of profit. But and again, it's all relative because all venture capitalists are looking at very risky models to begin with. You know, a VC firm will invest in 9, knowing that 1 will actually make it. So keep all of these things in perspective. On the y-axis, I have social impact and utility. So this, again, remember, this is from the investor side. So low utility social impact means I'm an investor. If I do good for the world, that's an okay thing, but I don't really personally care about it that much. I'm mostly, you know, I'm ambivalent. High utility social impact, you know, I do actually care about the triple bottom line. Like, you know, it would be nice to make money and also do good for society. So that's just sort of a personal preference. And I'm thinking of, you know, an investor, you know, it's just some, I guess I'm just thinking of like one specific angel, like some multi-billionaire or something like that. So we've got 4 different spaces here. I like to call this the dump space. High risk for profit, low utility for social impact. So, you know, risk is relative in venture capital. You know, like no pitch is a treasury bond, nothing's a sure thing. But it's high risk for profit. It doesn't really have a social impact. You know, there isn't really an incentive, all things considered, if I have options in all 4 of these spaces to look for something there. I mean, you know, I'd be taking a big risk to do something that might make me money and definitely, you know, wouldn't have sort of like, you know, environmental or social good components. Moving over to the left, this is like a safe space. You know, I think this is the vast majority of deals that just don't have these social enterprise, social value considerations built in. You know, it's low risk for profit. I'm probably going to make a profit. And you know what? It doesn't have anything to do with making the world a better place, but that's fine. I'm just trying to make some money. So, you know, ambivalence on impact, concern for profit. That's pretty common. So let's go up here. This is like a dream space that I don't really think exists in most cases. You know, those opportunities. I mean, Mohammed Yunus maybe. I mean, maybe the Grameen Foundation, the initial investment could land there. But like, you know, low risk for profit, high utility social impacts. I mean, it's going to take like a really sort of innovative mind to find something that fits that profile. I think when you think about social impact, what's going to be most common is something existing in this space. It's riskier than something that may be safer, but you get the added benefit of, you know, triple bottom line facets to your business plan, and that can be appealing to a certain kind of investor. And I think that sort of thinking is getting more common. I think that the trend over time is seeing impact investing houses coming out, people that literally desire to invest money into things that aren't just making a profit but are also doing good. It's my hope that that continues to be the case going forward. So just one more short little video. We won't do a workshop-y thing. I just sort of, have you guys ever heard of impact investing? Anybody? Somebody? Nobody? Okay, I'm going to educate them. This is great.
We've heard a lot about impact investing. What does that actually mean?
Impact investing is a very simple idea. It's the simple idea that an investment can not only seek financial returns, as most investments do, but also seek to solve social and environmental problems. That is either a really obvious idea, or it's an incredibly radical idea. It's obvious because many of us know that when we make investments in healthcare or in education or in low-income housing, those investments can help address social problems. But it's also a radical idea because many people still cling to the belief that the only purpose of investing should be to make money, and that if we want to solve social problems, we should just use charity and we should just be giving our money away. Impact investing is a new idea for those people because it really pushes forward the idea that investing can be, alongside government and philanthropy, a tool we can use to solve social problems.
We're talking about companies that actually, through their goods and services, are providing some sort of social good. It's not this old model of, we make a lot of money, we give a little bit to good causes, and we tell the world about that because that makes us look good. It's something different than that.
Right. So it's that and more. It's basically saying that we shouldn't be limited to grants as the key tool that we use, but rather one of a number of tools that could include below market rate loans, investments into higher risk areas that a traditional market rate investor might not explore, and a whole host of areas of engagement with organizations that are nonprofit or for-profit, but are really about impact.
Unlike a company like Ben & Jerry's that produce a product and then use some of those profits to support communities, impact investors are looking at companies that are, through the company itself and the products that they sell and the customers they sell to, are addressing social problems. So for instance, it's investors who are lending to private schools that are very affordable in the slums of India that are helping to close the educational gap. Or it's investors who are giving loans to farmers in rural Africa who take those loans and allow them to participate in much more lucrative international export opportunities versus local opportunities.
In the space of impact investing and social entrepreneurship and all the areas that you've come across, what is actually working right now, and what should we all be a little bit skeptical of?
In the book, we talk about one of the problems in this sector are premature celebration-itis.
Sure.
We tend to get very excited about announcements of new ideas and don't necessarily follow up and look at what actually worked. And I think, to your point, not to get too technical, but the idea that somehow impact investing can replace government or replace charity, when you look down at the deal-by-deal basis, proves to be a little bit false. In reality, some of the most exciting deals that are both generating substantial social impact and also making money for investors are one in which the investors and the entrepreneurs work in very interesting ways alongside government and philanthropy. So I think one thing that works, and we see this time and again, is when the impact investors and the social entrepreneurs recognize that they don't exist outside of government systems and other philanthropic systems, but are able to harness them together.
Let's say I'm a newly minted millionaire, multi-millionaire, billionaire, and I'm just starting to think about giving away my money, making some sort of impact in the world. What would you say to me? I don't want to just write a check to some organization. I want to use the same business principles that I use to accumulate my wealth to create some kind of an impact. What would be my first step?
Well, I think the first step is to really re-engage with those things about which you're most passionate, whether it's the environment or arts or education or any of these areas. And then to understand, as you're thinking about what to do in that area, that the tools that you have available to advance the interests of that theme, if you will, really go well beyond what you could do on a charitable basis. And so maybe your first step would be to do as Bill Gates did and simply spend a year or two learning about what the real critical issues are in that space, what the current practices are, and to do that through the lens of impact, and to be looking for what are those opportunities where you could perhaps leverage more of a free enterprise market orientation to the solution in addition to what you may decide to do on a charitable basis.
So that's all well and good, right? You know, like social impact and everything. But you're an entrepreneur deciding on the standard for where you're going to get your dollars from. If you're standing in like your shoes and saying, should I go to like an impact house? Do I really care who's giving me the money or what their values are? Or is it more like, please, somebody give me some dollars because I have this brilliant, brilliant idea? And I would argue that that's sort of like up to you. I mean, that's honestly, there's no bad or good to it. I would say it's important when starting a business as an entrepreneur to feel, you know, proud of the brand you create and make sure that, you know, it aligns with your values and it aligns with sort of how you want to market that company going forward. But that doesn't mean it has to be like something that cures cancer or, you know, like saves, you know, increases educational opportunities in the slums of India or whatnot. And I think it boils down to thinking about your values and your mission. Do you care? And this is something that like people sort of start this discussion has sort of begun a little bit. Like, you know, do you care where your dollars come from when you look back? Like, does it matter that this angel investor that really believes in you also owns like, you know, massive, massive holdings in RJ Reynolds or whatnot? That's up to you. You know, but I would say it's very, very hard because you're fighting sort of human nature when you need dollars and somebody sort of gives you dollars, and to sort of look at them and look at, you know, them investing in you as now being a part of what you're building and therefore part of that identity. So it's a little bit of the softer side of TBL, but I did want to sort of make a note of it. But anyways, to conclude, you know, launching a business that makes money is hard without taking anything into account except making money. So kudos to you guys for having, you know, interest, or, you know, I'm sure, like I've mentioned before, some of you guys are putting together your plans for the upcoming business competitions, and, you know, it's a really big leap to put together something like that, regardless of what it, you know, seeks to do. But I would say the age of sustainability is upon us. It's not like just like a buzzword for people that want to go to Whole Foods anymore. Like more and more you're seeing not only startups, but also existing large multinational corporations making triple bottom line thinking part of the way that they do business on a day-to-day basis. So you can sort of choose to be ahead on the innovator's spiral, and, you know, this is my opinion. I live and work in this, so I'm a little biased, but I do really truly believe that, you know, these sort of considerations are going to become more of the norm and less of the you know, exception of like the company that just wants to like look really good. Other options for tactical considerations, I would say, you know, I mentioned for-profits and nonprofits. I didn't mention B corporations. That's a new legal structure that actually the state of Maryland was the first to make it a permanent thing. But it basically means you can incorporate as a for-profit business, but you don't necessarily have to use all gained profits to make more, to maximize economic value to shareholder. It gives you some leeway to invest in community, to invest in social enterprise or other nonprofit organizations, or initiatives that have a social good component, but don't necessarily contribute to the growth of your business. And that you might think that that's not that big of a deal, but it is a big deal. Because if you're a for-profit business and I'm a shareholder, and I find out that you're using your profits and just giving it away to the American Red Cross and not reinvesting it and making me more money, then I could potentially get a lawyer and be like, how come you're doing this with my dollars? Like, I own this percent of the company. So the B Corp model is sort of like a not a catch-22. What's the word I'm looking for? Well, it's like an in-between. What was that?
Hybrid.
Hybrid? That's not what I was looking for. I don't know. I can't think of it. Some literary term that might or might have not made sense anyways if I thought of it. But it's in between, so it's a hybrid. And I'm thinking of something else, I promise. So you got your B corporations. In addition, state by state, I mentioned some of when we were talking about human capital, some of the sort of tax credit components that can come into hiring certain populations. State by state, as an entrepreneur starting an incorporated business, stay on top of opportunities, because there's always a bunch of programs that it seems nobody knows about, except one particular go-get-'em lobbyist, or go-get-'em sort of state expert or municipal expert. But make sure that you're taking advantage of all sort of profit components in mind, because a lot of them have to do with this triple bottom line thing anyways. But if I could leave you guys with one thought, or if any of these 4 guys we heard from could leave you with one thought, I would hope it would be, when you're beginning a business, you're creating something new that you want to exist for a long time, right? I mean, there's no better opportunity to decide what it is you want to represent from a values basis as a manager and as an entrepreneur when creating that and bringing that into society. So I'm going to make myself available to talk to you guys one-on-one for the next half hour, well, I guess the next 20 minutes or so, if anybody wants to come and talk with me, or if we run out of time, I'll set up office hours. But it was a pleasure having me over at the engineering school, and thank you so much for everything.